All right, ready for lesson 2 about parameters and return investigate. I'm going to go through a lot of this with you. I felt like we just need it. So, there is an activity guide that is posted on Google Classroom that you're going to work with along with me and along with a couple of bubbles on Code Studio. So, this is the review at the top of the activity guide just to remind you of some rules about functions with parameters. So let me switch over to the activity guide and just show you that you are navigating to level 2 on Code Studio. It is linked right here as well as on Google Classroom. And this is just listing all of these steps that are also listed up here at the top of in the instruction section on Bubble 2. So if there's anything that we don't cover in class together, or anytime I ask you a question and you need to fill those out. So go ahead and make sure that you put those in red text. If you want to pause the video now and try to do all this on your own, feel free to do that. Otherwise, we are going to continue and work on it together. So let's look at what we have here in our Number Cruncher app. It says first that you're going to run the program and see what it does. So I'm just going to plug in a couple of numbers and see what it does. 4 plus 5 equals 9. Okay, the answer is an odd number. And, oh, I have to enter a new number. Let's do 2 and 3 minus. Okay, and I'm assuming that works as well. Okay, seems pretty simple. Let's look at the code. The first question says, how does the function calculate work? So that's what we're specifically looking at. But let's just run through it really quickly. We have 3 on events for each of the 3 buttons. When those buttons are clicked, we're going to set text output label, which is here, to include the function with the following parameters. So this means that we probably have a return somewhere in that function that's now going to replace this value with the value of the return and put it in the output label. All right, so if we click the add button, it gives us a plus. If we click the minus button, it gives us a minus. If we click the multiply button, it gives us a multiplication. Now let's see what this function calculate does. Calculate has one parameter called symbol. And because you see it called right here, calculate with something in parentheses, that means that this is the argument that you are going to run through the parameter of symbol each time that function is run. So every time the add button is clicked, you're going to run the function with the following argument in the parameter symbol. All right, let's see what's going on here. We have 3 new variables. Number 1, which is getting a number from input 1, okay? Number 2, getting a number here. So we can't always just put a get number into an equation where we're trying to add 2 numbers. It is better, easier to read, more useful if we get the number and then assign it into a variable. Notice that these are local variables. They're only being used inside this function. Then we finally have a variable called answer, which I'm assuming is going to be the answer of the math problem. Okay, if statement, if the symbol is a plus sign, okay, then the answer is going to become those 2 numbers added together. Okay, else if our symbol is a minus sign, then answer is going to become one number minus another. Else answer will be the numbers multiplied together. So those are our only 3 options. All right, next we move into the mod operator. All right, let me show you a slide about mod real quick and kind of explain what's going on with that. Mod stands for modulus, and the essential thing about modulus math is that you're dividing one number by another, and the answer to the problem is the remainder. So the remainder could be 0, The remainder could be 1, 2, 3, anything, right? But the answer to a mod problem, which we represent with the operator of a percent sign, is the remainder. So what we see in our code that we're getting ready to look at is this if statement. If the answer mod 2 is equal to 0. So let's say our answer, we added 4 plus 4. And so the answer is 8. 8 mod 2. We're dividing 8 by 2. What is the remainder? So 8 divided by 2 is 4. There is no remainder. It divides equally. If that's true, then the answer is an even number. So this is just a really easy way to check whether a number is even or odd, if that's something that you need in your code. If the remainder was not 0, if we said 9 divided by 2 and we have a remainder, then the answer is an odd number. There's only the two options, so it's pretty simple. So here we have all of our previously used operators. And then we have our mod operator. So 3 divided by 2 is not going to come out evenly, and therefore we will have a remainder of 1, and that is the answer to the mod problem. And let me just show you one more example. If we have 17 mod 5, that's how we say it, that's how we write it. 3 and 5 makes 15. 17 minus 15 is 2. So we would answer that normally with 3 remainder 2, but in a mod problem, we just say 17 mod 5 is 2. It is useful if we need to know if a number is even or odd, but also you could use it to determine if a number is divisible by anything. So that can also be helpful. Back to the code. All right, so here's the mod if statement that we just checked for. It says set text even odd label, which is down here. And you're going to set the text based on whether the answer is even or odd. And then the last thing that we're going to do is now we're going to replace the value of answer. So let's say we had 4 plus 5, and the answer was 9. So up here, the answer was 9. Then we check to see if it was even or odd. It was odd. And now answer is going to get number 1, space, symbol. Our symbol is a plus, space, number 2, which is a 5, space equals space right here. And then the current value of answer, which is 9. And we're going to set text input number 1 and input number 2 back to blank. So that just resets both of these input boxes back to blank. And we're going to return the answer. Now, what is the answer at this point? It is not 9. It is this string of text. This right here is the answer. Then where do we need to plug that back in? Where are we returning it to? We hit the add button, so it is being returned right here. It's replacing that whole function. And then we're going to set that as the output label, which you see is right here. So that's how all that works. All right, did we answer all of our questions? What are the arguments passed through the parameter in calculate when it is called? You can answer that. What types of data does parameter require in the calculate function? Where can you find that information? So what type of data does the parameter require? Is it numbers? Is it strings? That's what we're talking about. And what is returned? What type of data is returned? Then I want you to make some changes to the code. You're going to need to add a divide button. And in addition to displaying if the number is even or odd, now we're going to display if the number is divisible by 3. So a couple things you're going to need to do. You're going to need to go over to your design mode and actually add another button to represent divide. Then you'll go back to the code and you're going to need to add an on event that looks very similar to these other ones, except now it divides or it sets the symbol to a division symbol. And then you're going to need to add another layer to your if if else, whatever it is right now, you're going to need to add another one to check for the or to add the do the division problem. And then what was the last thing? We're going to see if, and it says, in addition to displaying if the number is even or odd, we're going to display if the number is divisible by 3. So you're going to keep this one, but you're also going to check. So you're going to add another one, or you're going to add, I guess you'll add another if statement to check if mod 3 is equal to 0. So that's how you'll tell, right? And I think that's everything for that one. Go ahead and pause and complete that and then come back with us. All right, we're ready for bubble 3. Um, Go ahead and test out the app, run through it a few times just to figure out what it does and what it doesn't do. And then we'll be ready to walk through it together. So pause as needed and then come back. Okay, so let's look through the code. This is sort of like our, what were they called in the last unit? Traversal, sort of like a traversal where we're taking some information and then we're processing it and determining if it meets certain requirements and then doing something else with it. So, looking at where we start with our variables, which are both lists in this case. So, we have word list, which is getting some words from a data set called words. We don't need to look at that data set, but you might remember that that's what we were looking at the end of traversals. And so if you wanted to add data or access that data, you would go to this data button over here and look for what you're looking for. Then we have a list that is currently empty and it's called filtered word list. So let's skip down to where the function starts first of all, and let's look at what the function does. The function is called filter, and it includes two parameters, one called len, which stands for length. They just didn't want to confuse you because sometimes we refer to the list length. And so this is called len, and letter. So you can imagine that probably we're taking the input from whatever the user clicks, the length and the letter that the word starts with, and then we're going to do something with it inside this function. This show element waiting image and unclickable, this is waiting image and unclickable is here. So that just says that that's kind of like setting it up at the beginning. Before you start clicking on anything, it's going to show you those things. Then it's going to show that the filtered word list is going to be set at empty. So if the first time you run through, it puts things in that filtered word list, then the next time you run the function, it's going to set it back to empty and start over again. And then it's going to set the output to an empty string. So here's output. It's going to make sure that there's nothing there as you run through the function again. Then we enter a for loop. And all of this is just setting up how many times our loop runs. It runs as many words that are in that word list, and then it just keeps going until it has met the end. That's all what all that means. So if word list at index I, which let's start with the first one, which would be 0. So we're taking the first word in the list, dot length. So we're testing how long that first word is. If it is equal to len, which is what we said we wanted it to be, and that first word, dot substring 01, so that just means where exactly in the word. At this point, we're looking for the first letter. We start with 0. So the first letter of that word equals the letter that we specified. Then it's going to append item filtered word list right here with that first word. So it is going to run through every single word in word list and test it. Does the length and the letter match up? If so, I'm adding it to my list. If not, I move on and I go through it time and time and time and time again. Once we exit that loop, we have another if statement. If filtered word list dot length. So this list right here, if the length is 0, so if there was nothing that met our requirements, then we're going to append the item with the term no options available. But we're assuming that we probably are going to find at least one word. And so then what happens? We're going to hide the element waiting image. We're going to hide the element unclickable. And we're going to set the text of output to filtered word list dot join with the string comma space. So let me show you what that does. If I say that I want 2-letter words that start with a B, it's going to run through every item in that list so fast and check for 2-letter words that start with a B. Apparently I ended up with 3 letters or 3 words, and so it displays them by putting a comma and a space in between each one. It joins all the items in that list. So then where is this function called? Right here it's called at the very beginning of the program, and it's going to get number from the length dropdown. Let's see if we reset and run. Length dropdown is currently 1, and it's going to get text from the letter dropdown, which is currently A, set it to lowercase. It's going to print it out. Okay, so it did run through every single word in the list, in word list, and it found one result that are now in filtered word list. And that was one word that was A. Then anytime we change the length dropdown, love it when that happens. Anytime we change the dropdown, it's going to run through the function again. You can see here, it's going to run through the function. It's going to get the new value of the length dropdown, new value of letter dropdown set to lowercase, and then move through the list again. If we change the letter dropdown, it's going to do it again. So go back to your activity guide and answer all the questions related to Bubble 3. And when you're done, come back here and we're going to modify some of the code. With the modifications, we are removing the letter drop box, taking this element out. So you'll switch over to design mode to take that out, and you're replacing it with an input box, which is right here, text input. You will have to adjust some of the properties of the text input box, and then you'll have to go back and update the code. So anywhere that it referred to letter dropdown, now we'll have to say whatever you call your input box, letter input or whatever. And I think that's the only thing you'll have to do. So right there, right there, right there. And if it doesn't work, look through it and just make sure that there's nowhere else that you had to do. Don't forget the key takeaways for today. Extracted shared features to generalize functionality is known as procedural abstraction. I feel like we didn't talk about that, but now we are. Using parameters allows the functions, also called procedures, to be generalized. We can just create a general function, like where we were running through every item in a list, and give it specific parameters every single time, different parameters. And so that's called procedural abstraction. Abstraction is just talking about where you can have something work and not really need to know how it works. There's a bunch of other stuff going on under the surface, but you are just worried about giving it the parameters. Using procedural abstraction helps improve code readability. So it is very, very helpful for the humans who are looking at your code to determine what's going on. It manages the complexity by allowing for code reuse. So we can call that function as many different times as we want to and set different parameters every single time. And it just manages the complexity. We don't have just tons and tons of code. The function move with two parameters, ID and direction, could be used to move an element in any direction rather than writing separate functions for each direction. And lastly, don't forget to do your closing questions today. See you later.